Hi, my name is Jesse Anderson. In this video, I want to share the results from our latest survey on data teams for 2023. So without further ado, let's get into what the results were and what some of the insights were. To begin with, we started with our data team survey in early 2023. We received 81 responses to it. So we received these responses from a wide array of companies, different sizes of companies, different levels of value creation. And really what's key is that level of value creation difference. So what I wanted to do in this video and in my analysis was to segment what is the worst and what is the best, and what do those companies really do? Because as you probably know, there's generally a bell curve in value creation where a lot of companies are all clumped together. But really what I wanted to do was to look at what was the best, what was the worst, and what they did, and then compare those. So let's talk about that. One of the things that we see in the survey is that the value creation and the challenges in those value creation was very similar for certain things. So they faced very similar challenges. As you can see there on the left, there are many things that they both faced: lacking enough training, missing technologies architecture, friction. Everybody has real difficulties with friction. However, as you start to look at the differences, one other of those similarities is the shifting priorities. These are just things that I think are par for the course within companies. They're always going to have shifting sort of priorities. But what I want to do is also look at what's unique to them. So our high value teams, they're on the right, they face some more advanced issues: productionization, missing data teams, missing operations teams, where the low value teams were faced with early mistakes that they made early on. As you can see, inability to stick to deadlines, missing data engineering teams, being too ambitious. Another one that's quite common, only one person said this, but this is quite common in the industry, is hiring a company to help them, and they aren't producing any results. This is very common because these companies will come in and say, yes, we can do it, but really they can't. So do be careful there. The next one is around methodology. So what sort of methodologies do high value teams and low value teams create? So there in the blue, we see our low value creation teams. They are using some methodologies, and we have our high value teams using some of the same methodologies. But there on the right, we see some new ones of center of excellence, homegrown, and data as a product. We can see overall that the high value creation teams used more methodologies. We see that, I think we can see from this data is that both low and high value teams, even the ones that are excluded in what I'm showing here, all of these teams can benefit from methodologies. What I was curious about is which ones they're using the most. And as we can see, we're using a lot of data ops, center of excellence sort of methodologies here. Then we get into the teams themselves. What are the team makeups? So that we see the blue, just like always, the low value teams, the high value teams are in red. And we can see a very, very clear difference between these in terms of what they're doing and how many teams they have. As we can see there on the right, the more teams that you have, the bigger numbers you have there on the right. So we have our 2 teams, our 3 teams. Those high value teams are creating the higher value because they've taken a lot of my work to heart and said, we need 3 teams. We need data science, we need data engineering, and we need operations. Or as you can see, some are just doing it with data engineering, some are doing it with data engineering and data science. But we see the teams that haven't taken that to heart, the low value creation teams, they're trying to do this with just one team, a data engineering team. They're just not going to create that value if they don't have all the teams that are necessary. I invite you to take a look at my channel where I speak about this in more depth about why these teams are so necessary. Next, we have our best practices. This one can be a bit difficult to read, so what you may want to do is to go to the page. The link will be at the end of this video as well as in the video description. but you can see the differences, the best practices that each one was doing. And I think that this is the biggest, clearest marker between the two, the biggest difference between low value creation and high value creation, because you can see that the low value creation, very few best practices used. High value creation, significantly more best practices used. So these best practices, as you can see, are using unit tests, integration tests, continuous integration, gaining velocity. Some other big ones, they work closely with the business. This is one of the ones I advocate in data teams as this is really important for you to do. You have to work with the business, otherwise you won't be creating what they need. This is one of the biggest differences, in my opinion, between, let's say, software engineering, perhaps data analytics and such. If you don't work with the business enough, you will be creating data products that are not useful to the business. Other key ones, understanding the technologies before choosing a use case, or understanding the use case before choosing a technology. This is really critical because if you just say, we're going to use Kafka, we're going to use Spark, that's going to be a problem because you've chosen a technical solution without having understood what you need to do. Maybe that technology is right, maybe it isn't, but you don't understand it well enough to make that decision yet. Also, we see data science teams with all the skills, but we can see very clearly in this diagram, in this chart, the teams that create the highest value have the highest number of best practices, where the lower teams, lower value. So what we can do is we can summarize this and we can say, well, what is the biggest takeaway? The biggest takeaway for me, and one I saw very clearly in this year's survey, is that the high and low value teams, they face a lot of the same challenges. We saw that just a second ago. But what's key and clear is that high value teams focused on best practices. That's really what I'd like you to take away. If you are focusing on your best practices, then you will get further ahead, where if you don't focus on these best practices, you'll just get stuck. You'll be getting into high friction issues. You'll be getting into various issues. Focus on these best practices, and those issues don't go away. As we saw, still the biggest challenges even in high value creation. But the biggest difference that we see is that those teams focused on the best practices and they were able to create value in spite of these challenges. So I would really advise everyone watching this video, really focus on those things, focus on those best practices. And as I mentioned, a big thank you for watching this. This is the link to the report or the survey results. I go in depth and I talk about other things that I don't talk about in this video, more in depth into the other non-high and low value creations. I go through everybody and I share even more charts on that, other methodologies, lots of comparisons, and various other pieces of information I really advise data teams look through. So once again, thank you for watching this, and I really appreciate it. And I invite you to participate in next year's survey.